District Attorney. It's one of the most powerful elected offices in Orange County or anywhere, dealing literally with matters of life and death. It can make for fierce campaigns, and that's certainly the case in next year's race, where two popular but controversial politicians are already squaring off. Embattled incumbent Tony Rackauckus and provocative challenger Todd Spitzer. Some folks, especially in the legal community, are searching for an alternative. Enter Mario Monero. He's a law professor, good government advocate, and a former county official. He'll tell us what's wrong with Tony and Todd, what's at stake, and whether he'll make a run for the job. That's next on Inside OC. Inside OC is brought to you by...
Each new community 5 Point brings to life represents a promise delivered. Great neighborhoods are more than just places to live, they are places to connect. 5 Point is a proud sponsor of public television and community programming.
Memorial Care is transforming the way healthcare is delivered, keeping our communities and businesses healthy by guiding them on the path to wellness with easily accessible hospitals, physician offices, and outpatient centers. Memorial Care, leading the way.
In terms of government and in terms of criminal justice.
Yeah. Well, hi, I'm Rick Reiff, and I'm talking with Mario Monero. Professor, great to have you on.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you for having me. So,
we've got a lot to talk about. Anybody who follows the news has heard about snitch scandal, controversies, allegations of favoritism. You've got two popular politicians just butting heads on this. What is the state of criminal justice in Orange County?
State of criminal justice in Orange County is severely disturbing of the public in several ways. Because what you've had as a result of the jailhouse scandal, which, to be clear, involves serious constitutional violations of the Sixth Amendment right to counsel and the Fifth Amendment right to exculpatory evidence being turned over, so a right to a fair trial. What has happened is you now have this death penalty phase in the Decry case in suspension. So all the victims' families, everyone else waiting for justice, are going to be waiting for a while.
When you say, talk about Scott Decry, he was the person who shot up those people in the salon in Seal Beach, right. Terrible mass murder, and because of the of improprieties in how snitches in the jailhouse were used to gather, I guess, evidence against him. You're saying it's delayed justice.
Well, it really has delayed justice because it's resulted in the entire DA's office being disqualified as the advocate for the people in that case. But it goes beyond that. It has resulted in numerous other cases in the DA having to reduce charges, let people off, that sort of thing. How in the world is that not only justice for the county, or the people of the county, how is that making the county safer? These are just
political errors. Reality. Are the voters going to hold it against a prosecutor who overreached in trying to convict a bad guy? In other words, as you know, I mean, the reality, the law, as you say, is one thing, and it may seem terrible, but at the end of the day, if everything else in the county is going fine, are voters going to say, gee, just because they were trying to get evidence on a bad guy and overreached or whatever, are we going to throw the guy out of office?
Well, we can start with this. Our system is supposed to be not based on people, but on laws. And so the first thing we have to think about is we have a constitution, and every part of that constitution is important, including this part. And we ought to have people who swear that they're going to uphold it to actually uphold it. That didn't happen here. Secondly, if you're just somebody out there in Orange County, do you want some of these people let go because of these kinds of mistakes? That's problematic. Forget about the theory.
Let me ask you something else, because you are a law professor and you have studied criminal justice and you know a lot about it. Is Orange County the only place in the world where this kind of a or let's say in the United States at least, where you've had this, you've had law enforcement agencies using plants in a jail to get evidence and perhaps overstepping the bounds into the point where they were violating rights and things. It just strikes me that why only Orange County? Wouldn't this have taken place somewhere else too?
Certainly, and that's why we have these cases. So we have the Messiah case, which stated, that's a U.S. Supreme Court case that stated that you cannot use confidential informants to elicit incriminating information once somebody's been charged. You have Brady versus Maryland, which says that all exculpatory evidence has to be turned over to the defense. And then you have a California Supreme Court case in Ray Neely, which says that with regard to any confidential informants, you have to tell the defense about them. All of those were violated here.
Yeah, and so, and those obviously were not Orange County cases that you cited. They were in other departments?
They came out of other states, or the Neely case came out of a different county.
And so given that, though, so you think that given that law is set, most places, maybe all other places, have played by the rules, and that this really is an anomaly, what was going on in Orange County?
I didn't say that.
All right.
Other places don't necessarily play by the rules. That doesn't mean it's okay. It simply means that it happened, and there are solutions. The problem is the two gentlemen currently running for DA don't seem to be talking about solutions. They just seem to be taking their wads of money, and they both got a lot.
Let's take it one by one. Since you're already, you're making the case that things are not good now. Let's first address Tony Rackauckas. Okay, why is he not a good choice to be reelected?
I think it's fair to say that the current management of the district attorney's office, as reflected in the Court of Appeal opinion that upheld its disqualification of that office, is the best.
You're talking
evidence.
about when he was, in other words, he was removed from a case.
Right. I'll give you a couple of examples. You had senior district attorneys, senior deputy district attorneys, admitting that those three cases I mentioned and the law in those three cases, they weren't even familiar with it. You can't have that. That's the problem, bad management. But there's a solution as well. I had a client once who said that the solution to your problem lies in its description. Well, here, the Court of Appeal talks about that. So one solution that I propose is that as part of continuing legal education, which everybody has to have, that the DA's office and the attorneys in the DA's office routinely, every 2 or 3 years, go through some sort of 2-week prosecutorial science class offered by one of the two major law schools in the county, UCI, and ours, Chapman, and restudy or relearn and come back up to speed in the areas of criminal procedure that includes the areas we're talking about here, that includes prosecutorial ethics, so we don't have a repeat, say, of what happened with Nifong in North Carolina, the Duke Lacrosse case. So one answer here is education.
So what if Tony says, great idea, Mario, I'm gonna send all my guys to your class. Does that solve the problem?
Well, it's a start, but the problem is that the fact that it occurred under his watch suggests that he's perhaps not the one to implement it going forward. Is there anything else
besides this snitch scandal has taken on a life of its own, and maybe I think what I'm hearing you're saying, this is indicative of problems that require a new DA. But putting aside the snitch scandal, maybe it's like saying, well, other than that, how was the play, Mrs. Lincoln? But anyways, putting aside the snitch scandal, is there anything else that Tony has done that you think is disqualifying?
Yeah, I think from the outset, he's made it very clear he's not interested in prosecuting political crime. And the reality is that Orange County, like every place else, has had it. After all, we had an Orange County sheriff who went to prison, but only after the U.S. attorney started investigating and brought charges. Where was this district attorney during all those years? He was nowhere to be found. And that is partly because he's too intertwined with the political establishment. You need a district attorney's office that is utterly divested from political establishment. You need a complete depoliticization of the district attorney's office so that they can make judgment calls without worrying about, wow, that person endorsed me or I endorsed them.
Of course, the history was Tony got into office as sort of a response to a prosecutor or a DA that was seen by many people as too aggressive.
Right.
He was trying to simply boost his reputation by finding some technicality on a politician, prosecuting him, and making a hero of himself.
So,
what do you make of that?
So the answer to a Capizzi, that's who you're referring to, Mike Capizzi, the answer to that lies in part in the rules of professional conduct regarding prosecutorial ethics, that you don't overcharge, you don't over-prosecute, but at the same time it doesn't mean that you don't prosecute at all, that you have to have that balance. You can only have that balance, it seems to me, if indeed you have a situation where you depoliticize the office, where you're not going to have to worry about a judgment call because you're friends with or politically tied with somebody.
Haven't you also expressed the concern that you think the prosecutor and the sheriff are too cozy?
Well, you know, it doesn't have to be me that expresses that concern. The other part of this Court of Appeal opinion on Decry, the reason the district attorney's office was disqualified wasn't the mere use of the informants. And the Court of Appeal opinion says that. It is because they found a conflict of interest between the DA's office and the sheriff's office, because suddenly the DA can't criticize or go after the sheriff's department because they're supplying them in an improper way with this information from confidential informants. So unless you are willing as a district attorney to say the sheriff's department has got to abide by the Sixth Amendment confrontation clause and the Fifth Amendment right to a fair trial and all these kinds of things, and enforce that, then you're going to have the same kind of conflict of interest. So you have to be willing to divorce yourself as well and utilize the sheriff's department as simply the gatherer of information, but you have to evaluate that information against the constitutional guarantees.
Let's talk about the challenger, if you will, because I think much of what you say, Todd Spitzer, the current supervisor who wants to become the DA, would probably say amen. He would agree with you. He has even espoused, I'm going to make reforms in the department, you know, and he's listed different things that he would do differently, including transparency and even addressing homelessness and all that kind of thing. So what's wrong with Todd Spitzer as the next DA?
Well, the problem is that Todd's entire campaign has been predicated on vote for me, I'm not him. Okay, so he's been in the attack mode. And I do agree with a number of his criticisms, and he's very bright and very ambitious and very motivated. But one should expect out of that same brightness real answers, real solutions. As I mentioned, one solution here, education. I've yet to hear him talk about that. Another issue, Todd and Tony both are perfectly willing in a county that's supposedly fiscally conservative to throw away millions of dollars on pursuing a death penalty that's never enforced in this state.
And we'll get back to that. But, you know, with Todd, a lot of people, as you know, admire Todd as a politician. He's been a popular lawmaker. He's been a popular supervisor. They just say this is not the office for Todd because he lacks the temperament. And they bring up that incident about a year or two ago when he, went and got a gun because somebody was, thought the person was acting rather strange in a restaurant, and he brings a gun in to make a citizen's arrest and handcuff the guy and all that. And some people think that Todd would let's say exploit the office, or maybe use the power of being prosecutor in a way to punish people. Do you have any feeling on that?
I think I'm going to leave the temperament issue to other people. I think that the one thing that I've tried to espouse is people in office need to talk about ideas, and that's just not done enough. What I will say is that I don't think a campaign should entirely just be predicated on I'm not the other guy. But what I've also noticed about Todd, and I consider Todd a friend, is there's a press release for just about everything that goes out there. The ethical rules for a prosecutor are that you're not supposed to prejudge the potential jury pool. And so I worry, just as I worried with Mr. Rakakis when he would hold press conferences after announcing charges, that we're going to continue down that road. And that's actually not appropriate. I don't think that you should do that. I think the DA should kind of step away from issuing press releases every time we announce that or every time somebody is charged, that sort of thing. Let's just do our job.
If the only criticism of Todd is that he seeks every opportunity to call a press conference or something like that, or he's not being positive in a campaign, that sounds like probably half the politicians walking around. It seems to me then, if I'm a viewer, I don't know very much, and I've just heard everything you've said about Tony and everything you've said about Todd, especially if you set aside the temperament part of it. Todd wins that matchup.
Except for one thing. That means Todd's a politician. And what I've said is this is an office. The same, honestly, with the sheriff's office. These are offices which are two of the only 3 county offices which are ensconced within the state constitution as mandatory offices in a county that ought not to be political at all.
Okay, and so you now may be stepping forward. You've certainly said we need a third way, and you've suggested that maybe you're that person, and we'll get into what your thinking is as you make this decision. But first, let's just take a quick look at Norberto Santana, the voice of OC, who was on this show with Will Swaim and me recently, talking. We brought up your potential candidacy. And here's a recollection that he had referring to the John Chamberlain murder case that occurred in the jail. So let's watch this.
You'd get by the book with Mario, super by the book. The question is, does Orange County's elites want by the book? Because in some ways, I've always thought with Tony Rackauckas, we are getting what we want. I mean, the political elites of Orange County have made a calculated move that they, in a sense, want a political cop on Valium. And I guess, it's either Valium or lithium or, in your 2 choices. But Mario Monero is a very credible, when he was a chief of staff to John Morlock. Look, one of the jail scandals that happened because of, or was uncovered because of Mario Monero. Because the morning that they found out that there had been a jailhouse beating of John Derek Chamberlain at the jails, the very first thing that Mario Monero did was what no other politician would do, is run to the site immediately and start seeing. And when he saw them taking TVs out of booths, he started asking questions. And by being on the scene immediately, almost sort of not knowing any better, just went and did the right thing, that scandal actually moved somewhere. It moved to a scale of accountability because there was somebody there who basically called balls and strikes right away with no attention to where it would go. And it certainly went very, very far.
So that was a rather laudatory assessment of you.
The John Chamberlain incident was a tragedy. It was a tragedy, obviously, because Mr. Chamberlain died. It was a tragedy for his family, and it was a tragedy for our criminal justice system. A tragedy that was repeated just recently when another inmate was killed in the jail. So apparently things aren't better. And that's the real point that I'm trying to get across. We have to fix these things, and we can't fix them so long as people are tied to a political establishment to do it. Now, I am in no way suggesting that the use of political science, the use of political art to achieve goals is improper. What I am suggesting, though, is in law enforcement, it has far less of a place.
Yeah. So, what would give us 2 or 3 things that you would do to change the office?
Right. As I had mentioned earlier, I would implement required education in say a 2-week prosecutorial science course for all employees, all attorney employees of the DA's office. I would include in that the DA investigators who are not attorneys, but I would include those in that requirement as well, so that everybody understands how you use confidential informants, when it's proper, when it's not proper, how you do that. I would make clear from the top, from the beginning, that if people willfully violated that, then they're also violating the California Code of Professional Responsibility, the ethics rules that control us as attorneys. And I would have no qualms about then reporting to the state bar any of those violations for prosecution. In addition, as I indicated, I would step away from the idea of holding press conferences when people get charged, even in high-profile cases. I don't see the need for that. I think I'd rather let my professional prosecutors do their job. I would never step into a courtroom and try a high-profile case. That's exactly why we have the professionals. I would move away from the idea that has happened in prior times, that when a DA wins, people who didn't support them suddenly get demoted or moved to other places. That's unfair to the people of Orange County who rely on that expertise. So that's inappropriate. And then,
give us one more.
the one more is the death penalty. When I disagreed with Mr. Rackauckas about 8 or 9 years ago in budget hearings regarding the pursuit of the death penalty, I argued from a fiscal prudence point of view. There are no executions. That's a reality in California, given the state of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal. And it, at that time, cost $250,000 per trial more to pursue the death penalty than to pursue life without possibility of parole. It is now recently as much as $1 million per trial more. Then you go into the housing costs. Put aside for a moment the appeal costs, the housing costs. The differential over the next 35 years in housing people on death row versus housing those same people for life without possibility of parole is $3.4 billion, according to a recent law review article in the Loyola Law School Law Review.
So, of course, the counter argument is that, well, you're arguing costs, you're not arguing principle, and that if you believe that death penalty, at least in principle, would be a good thing, then fight to change the law so that it's less expensive.
Well, how many times have we fought over the last 50 years, or have people fought over the last 50 years? Mr. Rackauckas is a great example of that, to change the law. It hasn't changed. It's not going to change. Right. Let's accept reality and actually, for once in a supposedly Republican county, accept fiscal responsibility. Think about what you could do with that money. Think about how much more you could devote to gang prosecution, to sexual trafficking prosecution, to an area that's where Orange County is the center, which is identity theft, and particularly senior elder abuse, identity theft prosecution.
Okay, so run Mario, run. What's stopping you from, or you haven't decided? What are you taking into consideration here?
I love teaching. I love working with students. It is very fulfilling to me. I'm on a wonderful faculty with wonderful people. Your viewers know some of them. John Eastman, Hugh Hewitt, certainly. Our dean, Matt
Chapman
Parlow.
University.
Yeah,
sure.
Our dean, Matt Parlow, is a wonderful dean. Our students are wonderful students. So that's a huge issue. The other is a political reality issue, all right? Unfortunately, in the party system, parties tend to just stick with what they've got and not take a stand when there's a problem. The Republican Party stood by Mike Corona until he went to prison, for all intents and purposes. The Republican Party is likely to stick with any incumbent. The National Republican Party has embarrassed itself.
You are a Republican.
I am. The National Republican Party has embarrassed itself with the man who's currently president, and yet, even after that horrendous Access Hollywood tape, still, except for principled people like the Bushes, Romney, and John McCain, wouldn't walk away. That's a problem, and it's a problem on the Democratic side. They wouldn't walk away from Bill Clinton after his horrendous behavior in the White House. The problem with the party system is they'll stick with it. And I'm not a fool. I'm not going to sit there and go, I think I'll run for this and watch the other two people each have $2 or $3 million
well,
each.
If you don't, but if you then decide it's just too big a hurdle, what happens? Then it's
what happens is, honestly, is a hope that at least Todd takes a look at some of these proposals, and I doubt that he'd agree with me on the death penalty, but on some of these other proposals to improve the department, and starts adopting them. Because somebody needs to have an adult conversation about how to improve criminal justice in Orange County.
We only have a minute left. I want to show the viewers this picture, which is kind of a classic. This is you and Nick Berardino, then the head of the Orange County Employees Association, going at it. You basically, and this is not trying to disparage the people, the protesters there, but you tried to reason with a mob. You did something. This is when you were chief of staff for John Morlock, budget talks, everybody's very heated, And instead of just letting them have their protest, you went down there to try to reason with them and explain to them why these cuts were occurring, and their Nick is giving you a piece of his mind. And somebody said, or a lot of people said that when you stepped down after 4 years as chief of staff, you enjoy lecturing students, and people in the county don't like to be lectured to. People in government don't like to be lectured to.
Well, what I tried to get across in the time that I
and you have
worked with
5
John
seconds.
was let's have conversations of ideas. That's what I'm talking
Very
about
good.
here today.
And I think we did that just now. So Mario, thanks so much for coming on and kind of giving us the lay of the land of what lies ahead.
Thank you,
And we'll
Rick.
keep watching your potential candidacy. That's it for now. Thanks again to my guest, Mario Monero. You can watch this show and past shows by going to pbssocal.org or rickreiff.com. You can also catch our shows and our post-show open mic chatter. We've still got things to talk about on YouTube. And follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again on Inside OC. Inside OC is brought to you by
Each new community 5 Point brings to life represents a promise delivered. Great neighborhoods are more than just places to live, they are places to connect. 5 Point is a proud sponsor of public television and community programming.
Chapman University is a proud sponsor of Inside OC and community programming.